Oh, Denise and David, what a great pleasure it is to see you. And I want to welcome our audience to this episode of the Skirball Tapes. My guests are an extraordinary couple, Denise and David Holland, and this is the first time we have been smart enough to ask a couple whose work and lives are so entwined to be with us. But the overarching nature of the Skirball Tape remains the same. The nature of the radical imagination or radical imaginations at this inflection point in history. And I would suggest, and my hunch is that our guests, Denise and David, would agree with me, that the radical imagination doesn't just see fantasy worlds, but the radical imagination can see reality better than conventional thinkers. It takes imagination to think outside the box. It takes imagination to understand that there is a box, and that if you break it, you will see reality afresh and anew. But one feature that really matters to us today is that there's an inflection point in our time, and that is the nature of climate change. For example, last year, July 2024 was the hottest day in recorded history. However, Denise and David work not with fire, but with ice, staggering amounts of ice, fields of ice larger than some major New York states and United States. And their question is what is happening to the vastness of these ice sheets? What is happening and what are the consequences for us, for every member of this audience in their daily lives? What is happening, for example, to sea levels? Now, David is a professor of mathematics at the Courant Institute of New York University and director of the Environmental Fluid Dynamics Lab. And Denise is the director of field logistics, outreach, and media officer. And when I've heard them describe their work, I know they're doing things I would never be able to do. So, welcome to both of you. I've always loved talking to you about your work. It is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you for making the time. I understand you're going on another expedition in all of May. Is that you were going to be on the ice in all of May? Well, thank you for being here and speaking to all of us from New York. But I'd like to begin, if you don't mind. A picture of the two of you, not sitting in New York, but a picture of the two of you as you go on your expeditions. And could we please see you? Oh, my heavens.
Yes, yes. So this is David and me on a boat in West Greenland, steaming up the fjord, filled with icebergs and whales and lots of seasickness. And here we are retrieving a mooring that we put down. It's been out for about a year and it's recording data. So they're just about, you can see all the seaweed on the mooring string there. And now David will take apart the mooring and retrieve the data.
That is okay. What you said, uh, whales, water, seawater, and seasickness.
Icebergs and lots of seasickness.
Well, I think you're terrific to confess that instead of saying, no, everything's all right all the time. Um, can we, Jay, could we bring that back again? Because I want to look at something. Tell us again. Okay, I see the rope and it's covered with seaweed. What again is that big yellow canister?
That's a float. if you can imagine the way ocean operations work, is you have an instrument that you're trying to record data, but you have to make it sink into the ocean, and then a year later come back and get it to come out of the ocean. So a mooring is an anchor, like a train wheel, with a yellow float attached to it. And then the science instrument is in the yellow float. And after 1 year, you go back and you do an acoustical technology, and the yellow float is released and comes back up to the surface. And
that is amazing.
yeah. Well, one side effect is there's going to be a lot of train wheels from the ocean floor, and thousands of years from now, people are going to wonder why there are train wheels on the ocean floor.
But when you bring it up, don't you bring up mollusks that have attached themselves to it? And
Really interesting creatures. And our biologist friend in Nook, usually I'll take a picture of it and send it to him, and he can identify what it is. Just really interesting things
I think
attached.
they like the shiny titanium.
Don't know.
Nuuk is the capital of Greenland, right?
That's good.
Well, I'd also like, you work in these vast regions. Could we look at a couple of maps so the audience could get a sense of how broad your scope? Now, this is a map of the north, is it not?
Yeah.
And that's Greenland in the middle.
Yep. It's the world's largest island, and it's currently an ice sheet. So for the last 2 million years, most of the time, all of Canada and New York City have been covered in vast ice sheets. And there have been these pauses. 10,000 years ago, the ice sheets went away, not Greenland, but the one over Canada, and the one over Siberia, and over the UK. So this is the unusual circumstance we're in now. Most of the time, these are vast ice sheets with ice everywhere. Like you can walk through Central Park and you can see erratic rocks all over the place, not put there by the Department of Public Works of New York City, but by nature over millions of years, and all these long striations to the park. You can see this strong geological evidence that ice is the dominant situation in the north.
Well, I wanted to come to this later, but the question is on the table. People who don't believe in climate science, isn't one of their arguments, well, hasn't there always been ice? Is there something new now? When you go to Greenland, what are you finding that would not have been present 10,000 years ago?
The difference is really a question of timescale. Climate has always changed. The fastest change is an asteroid, which changes the planet in a matter of a minute and wipes out entire chains of life. Those are the big changes. The other changes come from the Earth and the Sun getting closer and further apart in natural orbit, as Jupiter wants to own the Earth, but the Sun wants to own the Earth, and we fight over us. And so we wobble, and sometimes we're a little bit away from the Sun. That's when we have these ice ages. We have less sunlight. And so that's all natural. And what it shows is these small perturbations in orbit have vast consequences for the Earth, meaning ice. And in fact, 500 million years ago, the ice was frozen solid. The Earth was frozen solid. It was a snowball, effectively no life. And we come in and out of these situations. And what is absolutely hair-raising and frightening is how sensitive the Earth is to change. And so we show up, and after 5,000 years, we are technologically developed now, burning old trees and forests, fossil fuels. And these small changes we make can have an unbelievable consequence on what happens to the climate. It's just so sensitive. It's mind-boggling that we're here at all between Mars and Venus, and we're in the perfect spot. Water's not frozen by liquid. And so it all came together in a rather miraculous way. And it's so delicate.
David, that's a very important insight, and I want to carry that insight with us throughout our conversation. The earth is precious, the earth is delicate, and and you said the smallest change can have these large consequences. Is that the so-called butterfly effect, or am I misusing that term?
That's a slightly different term. So
Yeah.
the smallest thing is called a tipping point. It's like if I take this glass from Denise, and if I lean it a bit, it will fall on the floor and break. There's a point at which it breaks. So a small little change can have a dramatic effect on something.
I see what you're saying.
And that's a tipping point. And the butterfly effect is just that a completely separate concept, which is interesting, called chaos, which is if you don't know where you are today perfectly, you are unable to predict perfectly where you're going tomorrow in the weather. So that's why we have multiple possible future plans, and we take the average, because chaos is a nature of nature and the nature of matter.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. So we've now looked at the north where you work, and you've given us these really absolutely crucial truths, realities. Little things have huge consequences. There is something real called a tipping point, and that the earth that seems so strong to us is actually quite delicate. So the south, where these truths also pertain, can we look at the map of the south of our globe? So what we've shown you is the top of our globe, our precious, delicate globe, and now the south. The scale of this East Antarctica, is that bigger than the continental United States?
I'd say roughly comparable, but certainly not smaller.
Oh, and that's just East Antarctica, right?
Yeah, it's like flying from Los Angeles to New York City. That's kind of the journey, go across the East Antarctica.
And how long does it take you to get from New York to a field site? Oh, I don't even ask because you have so many stops you have to make. But this is not a trivial journey.
Yeah, so my brain is scarred in trying to answer that question. Basically, getting into Antarctica always seems doable on the scale of maybe a week. Getting out typically is more like the scale of a month of trying to get out. In order to leave Antarctica, well, let me put it this way. When you go to Antarctica, you go first to a US base called McMurdo, 1,000 people. But from there, you go to where the science is happening, which is typically more than 1,000 miles away, called the deep field, somewhere something's happening. And when you go there, it's a team of 2 or 3, and you're dropped off by Air Force jets, and when they come back to get you, it can be a long time. More than you could easily wait a month to hitch your ride back out, because everything has to be right in order to get out. The weather right, the airplane's right. A lot of things have to happen. So it's emboldened on my mind. The last time I was stuck for a month, and finally made it back to Los Angeles Airport. And I got to the counter, and the lady said to me, your airplane is delayed for 4 hours. I said, that is not a delay.
That's just a little pause, right? That's taking a breath. But you love being there. I remember once, Denise, he was going to go down, I think, to West Antarctica, right?
Yeah.
You were going to go to Thwaites Glacier. And you were talking about the journey to get there, and you said, but this is where he wants to be.
Yeah.
This is where his life, this is where he.
It's his passion.
Yes, that was your word. This is his passion, is to be there. I wonder if we could look at one more picture to go back to Greenland. And you have to pronounce it correctly for me. Jacobshavn Glacier.
Yep. Jakobshavn.
Yeah. What is happening here that you are studying, that you are exploring? What are the small changes that will have large consequences? What is an ice melange? What is calving? I think I would know about that on a ranch, but what is calving? And what what are you looking for here? It's beautiful. But what are you looking for?
This is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, right? So this is a protected area in the world. If you look on the screen, when I'm looking at the far left towards the mouth of the fjord, on the far right is the Greenland ice sheet. The ice sheet comes out to this fjord to go into the global ocean. The ice breaks off, as you said, like giving birth to a calf. So they break up icebergs, and Denise reported perhaps the largest video of an iceberg calving.
Yeah, that was on the other side, but it was just this monumental breakage coming off the ice sheet. And it took about 20 minutes, and it was like thunder and lightning, and it was quite astounding, but I happened to have my camera set up, so I was very grateful to have captured that moment.
And that was the size of half of Manhattan, and huge, just boom. So that's the special of seeing, and that's natural. Of course, we are picking it up a notch by changing the climate. But from just a personal level, it's unbelievable to witness such an event.
What does it sound like?
What does it sound like?
It sounds like thunder and lightning. It sounds like a lot of rumbling and shotguns, like if we fired a rifle. It's the ice cracking, and it's a sound that I'm very familiar with, but when it's prolonged, I know that something bigger is happening.
So Denise's hearing is like her mother's. It's perfect. I not so much. So when we're asleep in the igloo, she will say, "It's happening now," and and we go out.
So, but what are you looking for? With your instruments and your questions, are you looking for the rate at which the ice sheet is melting? Are you looking for, what is it that, what are the questions you go with?
Like everything we do, we're only driven by one overarching question, and everything must come from that. So the best I could explain it is on your smartphone, like I can bring up an app here. It says weather. And that's the weather in Greenwich Village right now, 7 degrees.
What?
So that's that technology that created this, not the iPhone, but the mathematical technology and the observation of nature since the end of World War II have produced an app called a weather forecast, which is an amazing achievement of humanity. That tomorrow, there's a good chance you can know the weather. Now, there's a separate topic called chaos. You can only get a weather forecast out for a week or two. We'll come back to that later. What we want to create is the same forecast, except one for sea level. What will the future look like? And then everything we do is focused on how you do what you do so you can achieve that goal.
And I remember once we were talking about an op-ed that we had all read, and it was from a well-known scientist, and he's perhaps a bit of a denier of climate change. And you said he's got one thing absolutely wrong. I've never forgotten you saying that in the three of, he's got one thing absolutely wrong. The sea levels are rising. Do I remember that correctly? The sea levels are rising.
And accelerating.
And that has consequences for every coastline. It has consequences for the sea. It has consequences for the land.
Yeah, the place we were just looking at was East Antarctica. The really vulnerable place is West Antarctica. If you can picture it, East Antarctica, you compare to the United States, which is a good geographical conceptual reference to think of the US which is land out of the ocean, and that land being covered by 2 or 3 miles of ice, a lot of ice. West Antarctica is actually ice from East Antarctica that has spilled into the ocean. West Antarctica,
Oh, really?
all in the ocean.
So East Antarctica, forgive the metaphor, gave birth to West Antarctica when the ice slid over?
Yeah, so it just slowed under gravity and it built up and it snowed and then it began to snow over time. West Antarctica, we believe, has disappeared perhaps in the previous ice age when it ended. And it contains many feet of sea level globally. If it was to go, it would raise sea level easily by 10 feet around the globe. And it has disappeared in the past. I don't know how to explain it, but maybe I could just state it. Ice that's already in the ocean is really vulnerable, obviously, to the ocean. And the ocean is the killer for melting ice, not the atmosphere.
So it seems that, and these, as you're pointing out so vividly, these are not like the tiny little cubes of ice we have in our refrigerators. These are the size of American states, some of them. So it's in West Antarctica that we find what I've learned to call Thwaites Glacier. Who was Thwaite, by the way? I can barely say it, but who was Thwaite?
So World War II ended, and U.S. Navy had nothing to do, kind of, and so it started Operation Deep Freeze and started sending the Army and the Navy to Antarctica. One of those guys ended up being a professor in Wisconsin, Thwaites, Dr. Thwaites.
Professor Thwaites.
Yeah. They went down and they were the first humans to ever fly over it and take pictures and see it.
Oh.
And yeah, that was just at the end of World War II.
Now, is Thwaites Glacier the one that's also called the Doomsday Glacier?
Yeah, that's the media.
And why is it called, or is that just exaggeration?
No, it's a name that the media brought out, not scientists, but it's a good moniker, I think, in the sense that it's the singular, most vulnerable glacier on Earth, the Thwaites area, about the size of the United Kingdom. It's a glacier that, if you could envisage what it looks like, if you were to remove that glacier in your mind out of West Antarctica, the bed under it, the floor, the rock, is a mile below sea level. This thing is way, way out in the ocean, and it's stuck right now on a little mountain that's holding it back. And of all the glaciers in the world to be unstable, it's the most unstable, but it's on a tipping point, a rock, that it can retreat from. And when it retreats, there's no way to stop it because it's unstable. It's like a glass falling out of your hand to the floor. Well, it's too late. You tipped it. So Thwaites is the most vulnerable in the world. And by the same coincidence, warm water around Antarctica is generally not found. Otherwise, Antarctica wouldn't be what it is. The one place that has warm water is Thwaites, and it's the most vulnerable glacier. And right now it's melting hundreds of feet per year. It's the biggest melt anywhere on Earth, with the most vulnerable glacier anywhere on Earth, and it represents the biggest threat to sea level.
Well, this is why your expeditions there are called the Melt Expedition, because you must see what, I have to tell you, in terms of the imagination, you've measured this. You've seen it there. In fact, there's a wonderful photo of the two of you in a helicopter looking down and seeing a little tiny helicopter, and there you are. But the realities you bring us are the realities that people, the magnitude of them, some people will see in science fiction. They may see it in the scientific literature. But you are using scientific tools and be very careful scientists. You are showing us something that might overwhelm, that something of the magnitude of novels or imaginative acts. And it's extraordinary. And it seems to me one of the acts of faith you have as teachers as well is that people will be able to see these realities and not run from them.
Mhm.
That if you describe them and are honest with people, people will not, most people will not be afraid and will look at these realities instead of denying. It's a wonderful act of faith you have in the capacity of reason, and I admire it very much. But how did you, here you are, how did you get here? Denise, what kind of a kid were you? Were you out? You weren't playing ice hockey. I know he was out there playing ice hockey, but what kind of a kid were you and where did you study and what did you think you were going to become?
Never imagined I'd be here. I think that's the truth. David and I met in university and we got married. And by the time we ended up at York University and he started to do his field research in Greenland, I immediately knew that he needed help. So I have a business degree. Organization is a skill that I have. And I was able to put it to use and help him in the logistical side of things, because I think I've discussed this with you before. It's
Hmm.
important that you get things right and that you don't forget anything because it can have bad consequences. So I'm glad. So that's how I ended up here.
So your business background was helpful.
It is, yeah, very helpful.
So yes, so you are responsible for these expeditions, north and south, for having everything you might need. Because what happens if you leave the antibiotic out, for example?
Exactly. And our first expedition was, I think, in 2007. And we were really green, I have to say, really green. I didn't know what I was about to face. And actually, when we got to Greenland, the team got separated because of bad weather. So half the team was in the field and half the team was in town. And we had not prepared for fuel, water, food. We just got separated and things, I learned from that and it's never happened again. Like it's not,
I can believe that.
yeah. So you really understand the importance of getting it right.
I can see that. David, you've described yourself. I in one of the interviews with you, I was reading as a nerdy kid. Were you really a nerdy kid?
A little bit, I guess, but I was growing up in Canada. Of course, I was a hockey player. I was on ice more than not. My mother would always write notes for me saying, David is sick today. And then she would send me out on the pond playing hockey.
And so you were in a part of Canada, weren't you, that is really in the north, very northeastern part, right? Or and what part of Canada did you grow up in, Denise?
I was saying Newfoundland, we both were born in Newfoundland.
Oh, yeah.
And what's striking growing up there is there are, like Central Park, except more so, there are just giant rocks everywhere and evidence of glaciers dominating that part of the world. And that always struck me as why. And so that never left me as a kid. And still the question I think today, does this all work, this climate thing with ice?
Well, so some people, archaeologists, look for human remains in ruins, and your colleagues would look for rocks and the remains of geological remains, right?
No.
Paleogeology, and look for what is the past of our precious earth. So you meet in university, and Denise says quite rightly, there should be some more, you need some collaborators. But but what does it mean? You were doing models, weren't you, before you did field work? And what kind of imagination does it take to build a mathematical model? Or you were modeling these geological events before you went into the field, right?
And what's interesting, the top level, there's mathematics is the language, if you will, of science. You can talk about science with words, English words, for example, about glaciers. That doesn't really advance your capability to deeply understand it. It's mathematics, equations that describe nature to a large extent. I still don't have my head around the fact that the universe can exist without math and vice versa. The science, we always leave out the word natural in front of science, but science is natural science. I think people are confused about that. Science is based on observation of nature, biological, climate, what have you. And so science seeks to explain observations, what we see in nature, yet math can explain it through mathematics. And the problem is mathematics gives you an infinite number of universes. Only one is this one. So you have to find the math equation of this universe. And the problem is, if you're void of observation and science and just math, you're lost.
It's a beautiful quest. That is a beautiful journey, both the mathematical journey and the journey into the physical nature. Because, and I was very struck, Denise, early on when you described hearing the ice crack and the sounds of it. And I think both of you have said, this is beautiful. We're looking at what aestheticians would call the sublime. You're looking at huge events that strike both awe and terror with these sublime objects. So what made you decide, okay, I am using math, and one of these mathematical models of nature will be the correct one? So you could have said, and kept on doing it, and you could have been running a business, but what made you say, I've got to get out there. I've got to get into the field. I've got to drop these instruments and come back a year later to see what they say. What took you from shirt sleeves and sweaters into those jackets and those helmets?
Um, I remember being with Denise the first time. It was just two of us together in the helicopter. And so we had the door taken off the helicopter, and I do half the operation, she does the other half. So we were doing the program?
Yes.
Yeah. And can you describe that?
If there's a lot of wind, it's cold, there's a lot of noise, and you're trying to communicate by hand signals, because I can't hear David and he can't hear me. And I have to lean out. I'm tethered into the helicopter, but I have to lean out, and the pilot will hover over a relatively small hole, and then I have to drop the instrument in and signal to David that it's down. And so,
And then I noticed, because the wind was blowing on her for maybe an hour, she stopped talking.
And not voluntarily, I bet. Not.
But the beauty, it's, if you could picture what it kind of looks like, is Manhattan with buildings, except all the buildings are icebergs and the streets are canyons, and you fly the helicopter through the canyons. It's like flying to the Death Star of that. And it's in that moment when your helicopter blades are feet away from massive icebergs and the pilot's hovering, that you're in a different place than you've ever been. And I remember saying to myself, we are the luckiest two people on this earth at this moment, bar none. And that always stuck with me.
You've also said nature rules north and south. What did you mean by that? You've seen the power. What did you mean? Nature rules.
It goes back to a phrase I heard someone saying that we need to be better stewards of this planet. We are not stewards. We are passengers on this planet. And the thought that we somehow control what's going to happen to the Earth is absolutely ridiculous. We can certainly have a negative impact through climate change. That's just really simple. Chemistry, change the atmosphere, greenhouse effect, warm the planet. But once you warm the planet, then you have all these knock-on effects, right? A list, top 12, forest fires, ocean acidification, sea level, 9 others. And so we have the capability of harming this planet, but the thought that somehow we're going to somehow control it, it just doesn't make any sense to me. We're just a small piece, really tiny piece of the Earth's 4.5 billion year history. Whether or not we're going to be around for very long is very unclear. And the Earth has lived a long time without us, and it's gone through, as you said, in the geological record, it has gone through things that are way beyond imagination. What has happened on this Earth and what will happen before the sun burns out in 2 billion years and the lights go out will undoubtedly be a story that is beyond imagination.
What's extraordinary about talking to you now is you have this great sweep of geological time, the time of the Earth and the universe. You have this sense of billions of years and live with that knowledge. And at the same time, you make these very, very precise observations of what is happening. So you live, it seems to me, you live in two scale. You live in the scale of these very, very precise observations that are building up a picture that will fit one of your models. And at the same time, and that's why I admire the two of you so much, you can open up, you see how big Greenland is, how big Antarctica, but you also see the vastness of the world we live in and these great changes that rule us rather than we ruling them. Even though there are dreams, aren't there, of sending atomic bombs to the sun? So, I mean, these dreams of control, I read about them and I say, oh, imitating a pocket character in Shakespeare. Oh, what fools these mortals be. But you've described some of the dangers of being in the field. Denise, if you don't have everything exactly right.
Yeah, I think it can be scary. We were lucky the first time that we went that I learned from it, and I do my very best not to let it happen again. But yeah, you're pretty. I think Tim Burns, the American filmmaker, I won't steal his phrase, but he used it somewhere. It's splendid isolation. Really are isolated when that helicopter leaves you. So you have to be extremely careful what you're doing. You can't afford to break a leg or twist an ankle or anything like that, because it could take a while for somebody to come back from the treatment.
Right. And the winds are not trivial, right?
No, no. When they come off the ice sheet, it's something real.
And what are they called?
Pitaract.
Pitaract, right. Words in Greenland are very long, very beautiful, a lot of A's and U's. And the pitaract is effectively a wind that comes off an ice sheet, and it is hurricane or worse. And when it blows, because we live in these fiberglass igloos, and you remember the sound when the winds pick up and you cannot go outside for a day. The winds go through all the aluminum pipes holding up all the structures like an organ in a church, except it's like something, very dark music, very scary. Yeah, Phantom of the Opera in Greenland.
That's very funny. But when you go, Greenland and Antarctica obviously is not populated by people, but by many different kinds of other kinds of life. When you Greenland, did you find surely in the indigenous population there were already explorers in place who were looking at these phenomena? And what is the story about the Cargill seal? I heard from you about can we show a picture of the Cargill seal?
Oh, wow.
Uh, who else, human or mammal, who else did you find that was also exploring the nature of ice and the nature of the weather? Were there indigenous explorers that you could work with, or you?
Yeah, going back to the seal, um, Denise, maybe you can tell us about how we pivoted from helicopters and probes to working with Greenlanders and seals to get climate data.
So we were at a meeting in Nuuk, and I met this lovely gentleman, and he is a biologist, and he was tagging seals with these very small recording devices. When the seal would dive, it would record depth, salinity, water temperature. And he was doing it because, as a biologist, he wanted to know where the seals were feeding and what their habitats were. And they occupy this fjord that we were trying to get into to drop the probes to find out what the water properties were. And so in discussions with him, I said, well, what do you do with the data? And he said, well, location mostly in the depths of the dives. And I said, well, could we have some of the data? Could we pay to have tags put on the seals that are going in these fjords? And so a relationship was born that has lasted many years since we've been going to Greenland. So it's a very useful relationship for both of us. He gets his information about the seal habitat, and we get data about the ocean water.
And the symbiotic relation between North and South. I'm certainly not going up to a seal and putting my hand near a seal because I won't have a hand. So knowledge they have of growing up and hunting and fishing and living there, they know how to find seals. They know the environment. They know how to interact with life. And it's this nice meeting of our needs, and they're also interested that we help them get more data on their environment. So they're very savvy people, the Greenlanders, and they're very much, they're special in the sense that because they live a harder life than us, if you will, environmentally, I think it's made them a little bit sharper than us in some respects. And we think the opposite, which is kind of naive.
So it is a very good collaboration.
Yes.
In producing. I first met you in Abu Dhabi, and I remember, and I do have to ask you, we were at New York University Abu Dhabi. A big city in a big desert. There we were, and this is where our conversations began. At a hotel in a big city in a big desert. And I wondered, you built a small measuring station, didn't you, in Abu Dhabi to measure the sea levels? What is the importance to an Abu Dhabi? Why, when you once spoke in Abu Dhabi, did the environmental minister come and take earnest notes? What is how your work is not just in the north and in the south, but throughout the globe? So why was that environmental minister so concerned and so interested in what you were doing?
I think it gets to the point where some people get it that the planet that we are on is quite small. In other contexts, I would say it's quite big. Depends on what we're talking about. Here we're talking about sea level. If you take ice from Antarctica and you melt it and put it in the ocean, it doesn't stay there. The ocean likes to be flat around the world, if you will, but it's not a sphere. So the water spreads. And as Antarctica melts, effectively hours later, the whole global sea level is gone. Hours later. And so, for example, if you were to think of Indonesia when the earthquake happened a decade ago, when the sea level changes, when the seafloor suddenly moves, that wave travels at the speed of an airplane, right? The ocean gravity waves travel at the speed of an airplane.
It's a tsunami, right?
And it's Antarctica is always melting, making these little tsunamis hardly perceptible. But once you get your head around it, that the water spreads around the world, which this person obviously understood, A, and B, that a city was built at a height of about a meter above sea level, and Antarctica has way more ice than that. So he immediately gets that his city is almost certainly going underwater.
So I could see why the ministers wanted to listen to you. And they would have to think of ways of dealing with this phenomenon.
Which is, Denise and I were talking about this. There is this concept, Denise, United Nations announced this year, ice preservation year. Can you comment on the idea of ice preservation? Because that's kind of pointing to Kate's question. Where does that, can you explain that question? Why it's such a hot topic?
Well, I guess people are interested in knowing how we can preserve the ice. I mean, I know there's projects in the Arctic where they want to spray water onto the ice to build more ice, so that the shrinking sea ice in the Arctic. These are all sort of projects that people are trying to wrap their minds around in how to preserve the ice that's left. That's how I would describe it. So people, like you were saying about shooting, bombs into the sun, people are coming up with a lot of crazy ideas, but maybe some of them will work. Maybe some of them will. I don't know.
And so, full disclosure, in a few months, we will go to Queens and begin investigating whether or not you can block the ocean from reaching Queens. This is for real. So now, we did not say we are blocking the ocean. We said we are investigating in a computer model. And we're actually putting instruments and robots in the ocean to figure out how does the warm water get to Thwaites in the first place. We're going to map that out, and then we're going to propose that humanity build a wall in front of Thwaites. It's not a very big wall. It's like a wall that's maybe 300 feet high by 5 miles wide. There's a choke point in Antarctica, a little channel where the water's going. So some ideas are absolutely crazy or not doable financially or not doable physically. We think this is an idea that could actually stop Thwaites or halt it for a century or more.
But the main thing to realize is that first it has to be mapped out like virtually before anything gets touched. Because, and also the whole discussion with groups and governments and if it could be done with like there's a lot of considerations to take into account.
And people very personally, based on the fact they seen the drunk text mail late at night saying, "Don't touch the earth." Around the topic. But humanity has some big questions to face. You can block a glacier in Antarctica and you can save the coastline of the entire world, or not.
So the work that has to be done is scientific, to see if this is, to model it out mathematically, to model it out what the engineering would be, and to bring people along, governments, as you say, politically, so there will be collaboration on this intervention that will be more constructive than destructive. What a very exciting thing to work on. But I keep on using the word work, but I'm very glad you told us this. Expensive? No. But may I ask you a more mundane question about money? The United States government is cutting the scientific funding. Canada, no. US, yes. Do you see any revert? I don't mean to ask you to be polemical because you're very careful scientifically. You're very careful when you speak. How much damage can you foresee of these cuts in the United States funding of NASA, for example, or the NSF?
Um, Personally, first I'll say this in a weird direction. If we go back to how did we get NSF? So NASA came out of a dream that was passed on to President Kennedy, go to the moon. NSF came out of a decade before, people asking a question, which is, what is underneath the continent where the liquid earth begins to mantle? Somebody had a question, and they said, we can't do this ourselves. We're going to have like a science foundation to answer questions. And what I feel, and I said this a decade ago, and this has nothing to do with the current administration. We in the US need to become more focused on answering questions. I get what people say, let's just be curious and investigate the universe. I think society is not in a state where that's plausible. We need to answer questions that will serve some. Humanity could be on the brink of extinction in no time or in a long time. We, in order to survive, need to develop science, and science is not the answer to everything, but it's important enough, and you understand that. So what I would say is that the current situation means we have to be sharper in explaining what we are doing for society. And I think we've become lazy, and we just say the government will do it. Well, yes, the government should do it, but we need to explain and motivate people. I remember being in Antarctica and talking with Congress people, and I watched scientists talk in a way that made no sense. And the Congress people were like, I don't even know why we're funding Antarctica. And it was so poor. We need to be clear. And part of that is we need to, if what we're doing is so important to the world, then the world should get that. And so we are turning to private funding and saying to philanthropy in the US, this is what we're trying to do. And we're getting a very positive response, not because we're eloquent communicators, but because they feel the problem and we are explaining it to them. So that's a rather twisted answer, but you can see in there, okay, that's where I'm coming from. I think we can make all of this better, private and public.
It's not twisted at all. And indeed, you're both very clear. Their question, the sea levels are rising. There may be something we can do in Antarctica. We have to understand it scientifically. We have to understand the engineering. We have to understand the politics. We need to have collaborations if it's going to be feasible in funding it. And the scientists will show us the mathematics of nature. And then the people like the two of you who wish to speak both to scientists as scientists and wish to speak to your fellow human beings, saying, yes, there's something we can do. Here is the question, and this is why we must answer it.
Perfect.
I think you're.
We need to hire you. You will have a contract sent immediately after this interview.
I accept. I want to keep on working with you. Well, listen, you two marvelous, marvelous people. I was going to ask you about the term Anthropocene, but we can do that another day. But this conversation is going to be released in early June of 2025. And you will have been on another month-long trip to Greenland. June 8th of each year is World Oceans Day. And I invite everyone who is hearing us now and seeing us now, look at their work, marvelous PBS report about their work, look at the other scientists who are doing the work, accept what science is saying because true science is modest. And citizens should join with scientists in seeing what we can do to keep this species and its almost accidental globe working for at least a few more eons. Last word, you two. Do you have a last word for World Oceans Day?
I think we always say that our ocean is the outside. We have to different.
Our ocean is what?
Our ocean is the world's, the Earth's heart, the heart.
Yeah, that the of all the things, of course, we came out of the ocean many millions of years ago, wandered onto land. So we're the weird ones on the land. The ocean is the true life that began on the earth and thrived. And it is very susceptible to things we do. Let's just say a few more negative things. Plastics going into the ocean will soon be more than the mass of all the marine life in the ocean. More plastics by 2050 than life. The ocean is warming at an incredible rate. 90% of all the heat from global warming in the air, 90%, 90, goes into the ocean. We're only getting a little bit of it. The ocean pH is changing, and skeletons can no longer build at a certain point. It's too acidic. These are all very dire, and say, David, you're very dark. Well, the things that are good, I don't want to worry about. The things that are not good, we need on our radar screen. And destroying the ocean will destroy us.
That is the last word. And this is not, these two people, as you can see, are not wild-eyed, running around shrieking out implausible scenarios of the future. This is sober. This is the use of science. It's also the use, may I implore all of us, the use of our imaginations to see the truths that we're being given and to remember the ocean is our home. Let's not defile it. Denise and David, I cannot thank you enough. I thank for the conversation, for your wisdom, for your passion, for your clarity, and also for the rigor of your science, so that we're not in some dreamland, but creation of lands in which we might live to make our land and our watery home, as well as our green home, a home for future generations. Thank you so much. It's just wonderful talking to you.
Thank you.